the director, the executive director here at the Lloyd Library, and I'd like to welcome you to our first artist webinar. The Lloyd Library is located in Cincinnati, Ohio, with the goal of bringing science, art, and history to life. And we hope after tonight's program that you'll agree that our presenter and 2020 Artist-in-Residence, Melissa Haviland, has done just that. Tonight's program will be followed by a Q&A with Melissa. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat option, which for most of you is located at the bottom of the screen. Some of you may have questions about the 2021 Artist-in-Residence program, and I'll share information with you about that after the program as well. When we first saw Melissa's application to the Artist-in-Residence program, we were intrigued with the idea of her taking content from our collection and translating it and creating handmade wallpaper. As you'll see tonight, Melissa is drawn to the decorative and domestic arts, but she definitely takes it many steps further. Instead of focusing on what some of us might refer to as pretty plants, she looks at cash crops and explores them in their complexity. Importantly, the Lloyd series is part of a larger project called Flourish, with more than 200 screen prints on handmade paper. It's now my pleasure to introduce Melissa Haviland, 2020 Lloyd Artist-in-Residence. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, Patricia. It's also really great to be with all of you tonight, no matter what format we're in. I have a pre-recorded PowerPoint that I'm going to play for you now. That way I can pay attention to the chat. So if you have anything you want to ask while it's happening, please let me know. And then I'll be here for a question and answer after. So bear with us for just a second while I set all this up.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming to this lecture this evening. My name is Melissa Haviland. I am an artist and educator that lives in Athens, Ohio, and I was lucky enough to be an artist in residence at the Lloyd Library in January and February of 2020. I worked on a project with them that is called Flourish. I am trained as a printmaker, but use many materials and methods to deliver my artwork. I have this slide included because this was my first Havilland China teacup. And this is really one of the sort of golden moments in my work. I have for many years used domestic objects as a lens to discuss issues around class and economy. I like to think about the personal relationships we develop with objects, especially something that is a luxury item like this cup. Over the years, I have done quite a bit of field work in China factories in Europe and in the US. This is an image from a warehouse at Replacements Limited. What you're seeing is just a fraction of their Fiesta ware stock. They are the largest distributor of secondhand China flatware and crystal in the country. I worked with them as an artist in residence for 2 years and got to spend quite a bit of time discussing these objects with them. My first full day with Replacements Limited, I asked them to pull a teacup and saucer from their top 25 sellers by dollar amount. At a given time, Replacements Limited has around 300,000 China patterns in stock. And so these were the top 25. This is the major winner. It is called Spode Christmas Tree, and it is a pretty common fixture in people's homes around the holidays. Spode Christmas Tree sells for somewhere between $20 and $40 for a teacup and saucer. That same day, I also got to spend time with this teacup and saucer. This is Flora Danica. Flora Danica sells for $2,000 resale at replacements for a teacup and saucer. Just by the nature of that extremity, they were very interesting to me next to one another. They're also tactily very different. Spode Christmas Tree is porcelain, but it is a cruder porcelain. It has a decal that's digitally printed. Flora Danica is hand painted and bone china, so delicate, light, a whole nother animal. This started my obsession with Flora Danica. It is known to be the most expensive china pattern still made today. It was first ordered from the company Royal Copenhagen in 1790 by the current King of Denmark. It was meant to be a gift for Catherine the Great of Russia, who was an avid collector of porcelain. Unfortunately, she passed away just before it was finished in 1803. Flora Danica is still made the same way now as it was in the late 1700s. It is hand cast and hand painted in Copenhagen at the Royal Copenhagen factory. And actually, it is now the only Royal Copenhagen china pattern that is still made in Denmark. The rest have been farmed out to Royal Copenhagen factories in other regions, Indonesia, Eastern Europe. I'm not exactly clear where. And it is hand painted, as you can see, with this like very gilded gold sort of geometric bordering. And then it's also painted with botanicals. And these are unlike other uses of floral on most china, in that this is the scientific botanical illustrations that are being referenced here. And all of the botanicals that are included on Flora Danica come directly from a set of prints, engraving and etching prints that are hand colored, that were started by the same name, that were started in 1752 and took around 120 years to create, that show botanicals from Denmark. What's really interesting is I visited the factory, the Royal Copenhagen factory in 2016, and the painters for the Flora Danica china have the Flora Danica print folios open next to their station so that they can paint, use them to emulate those originals. And the buyer gets to choose, if this image is put onto their gravy boat. When I spent time in Copenhagen, I was also lucky enough to visit the National Library to see these original prints as well. They are an incredible set. There are 51 books plus 3 addendums. It's close to 3,200 prints. They begin as engravings on copper plate and then end as etchings primarily. The majority of them are hand colored in the books that were included here. I'm trained as a screen printer, but I also have experience in all hand printmaking. So it was really amazing to see them develop over the years, over the 120 years of the publication of this. It really, they see both, the Danish people see Flora Danica the china and also Flora Danica the set of prints as a major part of Danish. And of course, the books themselves, the text is hand set type, all the paper is handmade, they're beautifully bound in leather, embossed. And many people worked on these. I would ask the librarians, when I came across a watermark in the paper, I'd ask them to try to identify basically the shop that the paper was made in. And there's little records of that. And so I started to think a lot about these anonymous hands working on this project. This is the Flora Danica red poppy, and it here is maybe painted, hand colored by one artist, but maybe in another copy of the folio it's hand painted by another. Sometimes there might be a signature at the bottom to indicate that, but often not. Often it's meant to be anonymous. And here you can see the really lovely texture in the paper. This texture is called laid and chain lines. They are made by the mold, the tool that makes the paper. The horizontal lines that you see are made by small copper wire that are sewn down by the chain lines that you see that run vertically and are spaced more further apart. And so the paper makers are artists as well that were involved in this. And then here, thinking about all this hidden labor. And there's also a lot of hidden labor in China factories. It is the person who, there is someone who puts the handle on your teacup, and that person also is anonymous. What I really wanted to do was to discuss this exclusive China pattern, Flora Danica. So what you see is these are screen prints of that are on handmade paper. The screen print elements are the graphic gold geometry around the edges of the plates. And so there are 9 different shapes and sizes of these prints. There are 220 currently in the series. And the botanical images that are done in watercolor and ink in the middle are referencing 15 cash crops. I once read that no economy can flourish without a group of people to take advantage of, a labor force to take advantage of. This could be slaves, serfs, sharecroppers, migrant workers, or standard laborers. The 15 cash crops that I decided on were rice, wheat, corn, soy, poppies, indigo, rubber tree, oil palm, vanilla, cocoa, coffee, tea, tobacco, sugar, and cotton. This is when I decided to apply to the Lloyd Library. The Special Collections librarian at Ohio University gave me a brochure about the residency, and I pretty immediately realized that it would be an excellent way to push the Flourish project. So what I decided to apply with was the opportunity to use their collection to design wallpapers that would be in association with the Flourish prints. So for a future show, the wallpapers would be hung in vignettes in the space, and then the Flourish prints would be hung over them. I worked over the course of about a month at the Lloyd. I'd come in basically parts of 4 days every week, and I rode the bus in from Athens, the Go Bus, and stayed in Airbnbs in the region. And I came in, and every day I would look at books. I would sometimes spend half a day on one. Sometimes I'd go through them quickly, but really it was incredibly interesting for me to see all the different layouts of botanical illustrations. I specifically focused on researching both visually and seeing the written information in these books on the 15 cash crops. But it was also just great to see the versatility of all the botanical illustrations that were housed in the Lloyd. And I'm certainly, I know that I've missed many, but I had a great time looking through them. This is one of my favorites, the sheldrake. One of the first projects that I worked on in the evenings while I was in Cincinnati is to paint and draw a series of the Flourish prints to leave with the Lloyd. And so I used some of the images that I saw during my research in the library to paint these. And so the radish image that you're seeing here is from the sheldrake collection. And then next door to it is a black poppy that comes from Elizabeth Blackwell's Curious Herbal. And these are in the watercolor stage, and then after the color is done, they get a layer of ink drawing over the top. And then it took between February, finishing at the Lloyd, and just 3 weeks ago to finish printing the wallpapers for this project. It ended up that there were 11 wallpapers for the 15 cash crops. And I'm going to talk you through them right now, both the process of designing them and printing them. They all really started at the Lloyd and with the collection there. So this is a book about chocolates, and pretty early on I decided that cocoa and vanilla were going to be paired together. To me, they had all these links mentally. They grow in sort of similar locations. They're also wildly beautiful and odd plants, and they felt like they needed to be showcased in sort of like a jungle way to emphasize their sultry nature. So I would draw both what I thought the finished wallpaper would look like, but also the shapes of the plants themselves. I did a lot of research outside of the Lloyd, so in the biodiversity library that's digitized, also just in general on the web. This is a set of drawings that are just of the shapes of the cocoa plant. The pods in general are really strange, and they're very interesting to draw. They almost seem unbelievable. And so this is me sort of working out sort of shapes and sizes of how I wanted them to twine together or twine around. And this is a little further on in my time at the Lloyd. You can tell this because on the computer there you can see a digital mock-up of what the cocoa vanilla wallpaper was going to look like, and it also has some color involved in it. So here's like really starting to, so while I was there in that month, I started to design some of them. Certainly not all 11. A lot of things changed and shifted when I left as well. The next step with all the wallpapers would be, once I had a concept of the design, it was to make the positives that would be exposed onto the silk screens. So all of these pieces are done through repeat printing in screen print. And so I'm using large screen print frames and emulsion and exposing these stencils onto them. And so what you're seeing here is me drawing the key layer to the cocoa and vanilla piece. And it's sort of very similar to the mock-up that was on my computer. This is the screen print studio at Ohio University. And actually, I had a very long hiatus from this shop due to the COVID shutdown of Ohio University. So between, I would say, the end of March and sort of like the middle of June, I was not able to use these shops. We basically locked the building down tight to protect everyone. And so what I did in the meantime is do that drawing that you saw in the previous slide, and I designed most of the wallpapers during that time and did most of the drawings of the positives. So I was able to use that time pretty well. And actually that length of time in the design process really changed the way the future pieces looked. What you're seeing here is some of my large screens. You see one sort of off to the side, and then the other in the sink with that image that I was drawing on it, and my squeegees there too, which are very large. Each of the wallpapers is anywhere between 1 and 5 colors that are locked together. This one in particular is one of the more complicated, and it is 4 colors. So here you're seeing the first layer. It is a rainbow pull, or basically I'm printing with 2 colors of green. You see it's like a dark green that fades into a light green. This is that wallpaper with its second layer, this sort of copper color that starts to highlight some of the leaves, but also bring out the color of the cocoa pod. This is adding a red, especially in the cocoa pods. It's a pretty haunting color in the photographs or botanical images of cocoa pods. And then this is that final layer that you saw the drawing of. So this is has much more line work. It sort of traps all the color underneath, and really also tones everything down a bit with that dark green. The first one I actually designed and produced was rubber tree and oil palm. And I grouped those two together because they were the 2 trees in the set. I was very interested in doing rubber trees from having seen rubber plantations in India, being able to see basically the forest, this like evenly spaced forest with all the trees cut and oozing. And that's really what the oil palm plantations look like too. So in this case, I was thinking about the density of those forests and sort of the evenly spaced aspects. Jungles are being taken down so that oil palm plantations can be planted. It's really been affecting places where animals used to live, so it's really affecting the jungle life. This is the example of the finished wallpaper, so probably the most simple in a lot of ways, really boxy. And that boxiness really comes from some early botanical illustrations, especially the ones that use woodcut, where they trap the plant, like the plant basically fits the parameters of the wood block that they're using. It's a sort of a quirk of those early prints that I thought is just so charming. They're like maximizing every millimeter of the block, but what that does is contains the shape of this organic material. And so the palm oil trees in these are boxy in that way. And then this is an example of what this piece would look installed with the Flourish prints. And I'm really excited about the way these are coming together. You can also see these horizontal lines that are in the piece. I made a screen that emulates the laid and chain lines in those historic papers, and was printing it over some of the wallpapers to add a little bit of nuance or texture that sort of connected it to that history. This is the finished rice and soybean piece, really thinking about the very spare botanical illustrations, the ones that have where the image sort of floats on the page and their roots sort of dangle in the wind. I love those. I tied these two together because I like them together visually. I also associate them together as a palette. They'll be eaten together. I also feel like they have some similar politics. This is coffee, and it really became one of the strangest of the works. I emulated one specific illustrator here, and it's one of the largest images. The tree that you see, or the bush, is about 30 inches tall. So this one's, for me, like super strange. It's probably the strangest design, and I really love that about it. Tobacco was the last to be designed. I really wanted it to look like the dry house, so like the barns that you would dry the tobacco leaves in, and I wanted to sort of show the process of this drying, so going from green to that golden brown. And this is the process of the printing. So repeat printing is done on a long table with registration set up along the edge. And what ends up happening is you print every other space on the table, dry those prints in between. You see my assistant there is holding a blow dryer, doing that exact thing. And then what I'm doing right now is actually piecing in the same print, right, into that space that I left initially. So you can see that I've skipped spaces further along on the table, and then I'm gonna register the screen to basically nestle the print into those empty spaces. And so repeat printing allows me to make continuous imagery. So these pieces of wallpaper are all somewhere between 30 and 35 feet long. And it's a strenuous but incredibly gratifying process. You can see me doing the gold to brown rainbow pull here. Indigo is a rather politically charged one for me, and I started to get really, I've dyed with indigo in the past, and love the color, think it's hauntingly beautiful, but really started to think about the politics of indigo when reading Victoria Finlay's book called Color, A Natural History of a Palette, and starting to think about basically people seeking out that blue, seeking out the color that made, and enslaving people in India, in the US, to grow this crop that would make that luscious blue. This is the process of making the positives for indigo. I used a Cricut cutter to cut out these silhouettes of indigo plants, and then I did rubbings from those cutouts to make the stencil. I was using basically a crayon to do that. Then that gets exposed to the screen, and this is what this is a detail shot of the finished wallpaper. So you can see it's got the laid and chain line screen, and then those rubbing silhouettes. And this is then another image of the printing process. So again, my assistant is blow drying the ones that I just printed. I'm just about to pull the one here at this station, and then I will go back and print the missing pieces. And here is a sample of what it would look like installed with the Flourish prints. Poppy was one of the single wallpapers that I did. This is Elizabeth Blackwell's rendering of the red poppy. I particularly love this book. She's sort of a clunky artist, so I love the way they're drawn, and the engravings are cut. They have their own basically charm. They're just really beautiful. I also love the way that all of her text is also cut into an engraving plate. I'm going to talk a lot about this at the end, but I am in the process of producing a book of these wallpapers, a sample book of these wallpapers for the Lloyd Library. And I would like to emulate some of her design when producing it. So there'll be my handwriting that sort of explains the wallpapers and the cash crops throughout. And again, poppies are some of the showiest ones that you see in any of the botanical illustration sets. So they were particularly fun to draw. I wanted them to be bold and dense and colorful. This has the most stencils. It is a 5-color wallpaper. And I wanted it to feel like the section of Wizard of Oz when they are lost in the field of pop. This is a detail shot of creating the positives to be exposed onto the screens. I thought a lot about the history of opium when making this. In particular, the places in China and India that were taken advantage of through the reign of opium. And then, of course, I live in Ohio and am not very far from the epicenter of the opiate epidemic. So what you see here, these sort of like drips that I'm drawing, are for me the opium sort of like oozing out of the pod of the poppy. This one is very loud and large. Here it is with a couple of the colors in process. And because of the scale of the wallpaper image, it really started to almost like overshine the prints, which is interesting to me. And if you can see, there's this like laid and chain lines behind the poppy wallpaper that is glittery silver. So super showy, dense image. It was really exciting to be at the Lloyd and see such a range of botanical imagery. I saw some really early print work through this. So woodcut is the first type of printmaking that was used to duplicate imagery. And these illustrations are early on in print history. But they're still incredibly descriptive of the plants. And I just really love the hand coloring that happens in some of these early prints. I would call them, the crude woodcuts when asking for them. And so the next wallpaper is wheat and corn, and I wanted to emulate this particular style. I am originally from Illinois, and so was surrounded by cornfields much of my life, and also was keeping up with over the last many years of issues with Monsanto and especially small farmers. But I'm also when thinking about wheat and corn, they're two of the oldest grains, and they're incredibly important. There are a lot of other grains that we eat and treasure, but these are the two I'm the most intimate with. So here in the process shot, you can see that there's the hint of this DNA helix along the edge of this wallpaper. That's sort of referring to the GMO aspects of a lot of corn and wheat currently. And I also wanted them to feel sort of like fields of corn. Being surrounded in the fields of the wheat or corn, right? So like looking out your car window driving through Illinois. And then also allowing the color to sort of like be free form and not be attached to the edge per se of this imagery. So really letting it be drippy and fun, similar to those crude woodcuts. And then here I also couldn't help myself. I also was thinking a lot about block printed fabrics in India. I've been to India now 3 times, done artist residencies there. I've referenced it already in this lecture. And so I'm interested in Indian culture and especially in the aesthetics of the fabric. And so here I felt like it was, did sort of a good job of playing within that world. Sugar and cotton were the 2 hardest for me to design because I wanted them to be the most overt. I designed them thinking about toile fabrics, so French story fabrics, and I specifically started to draw these types of images, so images of slaves working in the fields. In specific, I was looking at places in Louisiana, which is sort of the center of sugar production in the U.S., or has been historically. And so wanting them to be pretty direct. This is a reference to images that I was looking at the Lloyd, botanical illustration of sugarcane with its Latin name in this scroll. So many of the works that I saw at the Lloyd had these scrolls that would give information or be decorative. So I have a whole sketchbook of scrolls, and it was fun to work with them in these pieces. And here you can see that in one of the scrolls it says white gold. Sugar and cotton from this series will actually feed into a series of works that I call white gold, which also includes porcelain. All 3 of those commodities have been called white gold in their history, and it had to do with their extreme value at different times in their past. And so at some point I can see these wallpapers also being used in an exhibition that references the politics of these 3 products together. And so again, wanting to sort of be overt. So what you're seeing here is slaves working in the fields, piles of cane, but also piles of raw sugar being pushed around with diggers, cane being moved by truck to the mill, sort of like specifics in the story of the production of sugar. And cotton really might be my first true cash crop, and really where I started to research economies in a more specific way. I read Pietra Rivoli's The Travels of the T-shirt in a Global Economy years ago, and was riveted, and have used it as a teaching tool multiple times since. And it really does walk you through how one T-shirt is made, where the cotton came from in Texas, where it gets where that cotton gets spun into yarn in China, where it gets woven into fabric somewhere else in China, and all these through the life of this object and raw material. And so I've been thinking a lot about the politics of cotton for a long time. I'm also a sewer, and so the references to the garment industry are interesting to me, and so I wanted to include that in this tool. So here's a detail of the finished cotton wallpaper. You can see cotton bowls, a botanical illustration of the cotton plant, more of the scroll work, reference to white gold. you can see the garments on racks and then workers throughout. More so I'm referencing workers here. There is some slave imagery from the US, but I'm also referencing current workers in India and Eastern Europe because there's lots of politics about the globalization of cotton. And then tea is the last of them. And it also is sort of transcends the Flourish project and also overlaps with other works that I've done that reference like water and travel and migration. I came to thinking about tea quite long ago as well, and that has to do with my travels to India. I didn't realize that India did not have a practice of drinking tea prior to, basically becoming independent. They grew tea for the English almost exclusively for many, many, many years. And so they had to go sort of through colonialization and past it to then to really feel strongly attached to tea. And it's really outstanding to think that it wasn't a practice more than 70 years ago in India, because it feels just like a normal part of your day to drink chai multiple times. And it seems really ubiquitous. And that was incredibly interesting to learn. With the tea wallpaper, I wanted to reference this history, and I also wanted to capture how beautiful the rolling hills where tea is grown are. All over the world where tea is grown, this is often how it looks. It's just incredibly beautiful. So this is a detail shot of the finished tea wallpaper. And what you are seeing are these wave forms that are also, I hope, referencing the tea hills and their striations of planting. And what you see too is cup forms that are pretty specific to India as well. These cups are called bar or piki put. And they are a kind of early disposable cup that's been made in India for many, many years. And so once India started embracing drinking tea, it was a pretty common way to drink tea in India. It still is common in many places, especially in Varanasi, where I spent most of my last visit to India in 2015. And so these cups are barely bisqued, and so when you're finished with your tea, you simply throw them on the ground and they turn back into mud, is the logic of them. And so my visit in 2015 was to basically document and make work about bar. And so they've come up here. And then also you see these little tea seedlings in the cup. This is directly referencing a kid's book that's called Teacup, which is about a little boy who must leave his land, his home, and he does it in a boat. And he has very few objects with him in the boat, and one of them is a teacup with a little bit of soil and a seed. And he grows a tree in his travels to his new land and is able to then plant that tree when he arrives. So this is a whole swirl of things. And this is an example of the finished tea wallpaper. And actually this one will probably always be displayed in sort of a sculpture-like look like this. So sort of I'm going to think about it as like a waterfall. So they'll be installed on the wall next to one another, the three pieces of wallpaper, and sort of flow to the ground, onto the ground. When shown with the Flourish work, some of the tea prints would be installed over the top of these waterfalls, sort of change the surface up. And so, yeah, this is the 11th wallpaper. And just to end, I wanted to show you what I was working on since printing the tobacco piece 3 weeks ago. So this is me in the papermaking lab. This summer I purchased a 3D printed mold and decal to pull hand paper with. So a mold is this frame that you're seeing that has all the lines on it, and then the decal is the golden bit, and that basically develops a frame around the edge. It develops the edge of the sheet of paper. And so you use this mold to dip into this vat you see next to the mold of paper fiber that's been processed from cotton cloth. And then you pull the sheet. And this is emulating a laid and chain line paper. So you see the lines that are all going in one direction that are very tight together. Those are the laid lines. And then these lines going the other direction that are more widely spaced. Those are emulating the chain lines. And so I spent 2 weeks making paper that will then be used in the book that I donate to the Lloyd Library that will hold the Flourish wallpaper samples. And this is an example of what that laid and chain line paper looks like that I just made. So you can see that it has the texture that was in the mold. And yeah, my goal is to hand bind samples of the wallpaper with information included on these sheets of paper as the sheets in between, and it will be in the stacks at the Lloyd Library for future reference. I am so thankful for all of you being here today and spending time with me. And I really wanted to also say thank you to the Lloyd Library and their staff. I had an incredible time there, and it's such a valuable resource in the region. And it was incredibly exciting for me to work with them and to dip into all the knowledge that they have and a little bit of their collection over the month that I worked with them. Again, thank you for coming tonight, and I will be available for question and answer.
Thank you, Melissa. That was really fascinating. I wanted to share with the rest of the folks here that this was our first time to see the work as well. So we sort of shared in that excitement and amazement that I'm sure all of the rest of you did. If any of you have any questions that you'd like to ask Melissa, go ahead and enter it in the chat. And otherwise we can wrap it up for tonight.
Somebody asks what my favorite wallpaper from the series is. And I have to say I don't have one, but I do have a least favorite, and that's the rubber and oil tree. I think because it was made first, there's so much I would change with the drawing. Sorry, my light goes off automatically. Let me quick turn it back on. Somebody asks to give a little bit more of an idea why I'm portraying cash crops. And that's simply to try to tie the idea of economies or lost labor specifically to the Flora Danica pieces that I was making. So these pieces will be, and someone else asks about how they will be installed. And so this leads right into it. So they will be, the wallpapers, the debut show will be in a mansion, which is an excellent space, I think, for them. So they will live in sort of a domestic space that's turned gallery. And they will be, the wallpapers will be shown in sort of large vignettes, probably like 6 foot wide. So continuous pieces of paper next to one another. And then those screen prints with the drawings in the middle will actually be installed over the top of them, and they'll be paired to the specific cash crop. And I'm really wanting to reference, I didn't show any pictures of this, but I really want to reference porcelain rooms that were sort of right near when Flora Danica was just started. There were these avid collectors of porcelain. Some of the richest people in the world would just have a room in their home that would just be porcelain on the walls. And so I sort of want to reference a little of that, you know, sort of like luxury and elitism of the objects, and reference economies somehow. And so sort of tying together, hopefully, the economy of these plants with the economy of this object. For the technique, I'm sorry, I've missed some that have gone past, but I will get back to them. The technique that I'm going to use to bind the book is going to be a Coptic bound book. Let me find one for you. So it will look, the spine will look like this. So it actually is going to have an exposed spine. The goal would be that when you look at the sandwich of all the handmade paper and the wallpaper, you'll actually get little hints of the color and texture. Also, this is a book that I've made hundreds of. I first learned how to make this at the Women's Studio Workshop, and it's sort of my go-to when it comes to sketchbooks. And so I will bind an edition of 3 of these objects. One will go to the Lloyd, one will stay with me, and one will probably exhibit or something. And so it'll be in a small edition. I will find the information about the show in a minute. I will have to look that up, unfortunately. I do not remember the location of it. It's in New York. And I'm having one of those things that happens when you speak about your work and you forget everything that, except maybe possibly your name. Someone asked, what is your process of sifting through the archives? I came with wanting to look at basically 2 major things. One of them is I wanted to look at images of voyages, or specifically like, you know, I kept thinking about Darwin and all of his, you know, trips on boat to, you know, research plants or animals. But those particular like sort of events, and there's lots in the Lloyd for that. And I also just was looking at the 15 cash crops. And actually that was a real lot of information and pretty complicated for us. It ended up that I had maybe 10 books a day or something that felt like they were on my desk. But primarily I wasn't reading the books. Most of them were not in a language I could read. But when they were in English, that was probably one of the most exciting things about going through the archive. And then sometimes they would hint at another book, and then they would lead me down sort of another path. And then in the last few days that I was there, I just simply looked at things that they recommended because they love them. And so I basically just asked the librarians what they liked to see. I got to see some pretty amazing things that were outside of botanicals and also outside of, you know, the things that I was thinking about or looking at. But I'm also a printmaker and make paper. And so everything in their collection pretty much is interesting. So it was really pretty amazing. Somebody else asks, were there other cash crops? It was incredibly sort of awkward or hard. I don't really know the word for it to come up with the list of cash crops. Actually, I only wanted it to be 10 to begin with. I was thinking 10's a good limit. When I was starting the Flourish prints, I wanted there to be enough variety on the wall. And I wanted them to be somewhat identifiable. And as plants that we sort of understood or had a relationship with in our culture. And so I didn't want to go too far abroad, I didn't want to open it up too wide. But that's when I started to think like how interesting I think oil palms look. I mean, I showed sort of an image of the close-up of one of the pods of oil palm, and they're so weird. And then I started to realize like I gave up using palm oil in my house, and it's sort of it's a real for me it was a big loss because I love Crisco in my baked goods, specifically in my pie crust. I have a Mennonite woman's recipe and it's so good, and Crisco is the main element, but it's pretty much palm oil. But because of the politics of palm oil, and I keep getting educated about all these things from my amazing students who are deeply political, I gave it up. And so I added palm oil sort of late. I think that I could have added many more. And also, I think that I haven't researched enough about the 15. Certainly, some of them have been way more sort of at the tip of my tongue or at the foreground for me, like indigo, poppy, sugar, cotton. Those are things I have had already. Tea, they were already ones that I was researching in my work for other things, just thinking about the world. But I think it could have been a way broader group and also smaller. So it's sort of a little bit arbitrary. So some of it was just my personal experience of like being in a rice paddy in India. Actually being in India, my very first time in 2007, I got to see a bunch of that's when I saw tea fields, rubber tree plantations, and rice paddies. And they're some of the most beautiful landscapes I've ever been in. And also there's challenging politics around basically those crops and how they're grown around the world. So it was, I think it has a little bit to do too with sort of like wanting to also draw them. Rubber trees was the weirdest one to draw because it's mostly just like a stick, right, with some slashes in it. And it was really fun to add it and start to think about it in a design way as well. I think that is all the main questions. If anybody else has anything, my email is haviland@ohio.edu, Haviland. And I would love to hear from you and would answer any of your questions. Some of this work is on Instagram. It's not on my website yet, but it someday will be.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I noticed one of the questions somebody asked that you didn't put us on the spot about is, will there be an exhibit at the Lloyd Library? I don't know if you saw that one or not. I would love that. So that's something that we need to have further conversation about.
I would love that too.
Yeah, so it's in the works. happened tonight, right? You can say that you're here. I wanted to talk a few minutes about the Artist-in-Residence program. We were very lucky this year that both of our Artist-in-Residence, who were both from out of town, chose to do their program in January. And so we didn't have any COVID-related interruptions. We weren't so lucky with our out-of-town fellows. In fact, all of them have postponed their fellowship until 2021. And if there's probably any word that is used, that I've used at least, during all of this, more than just about anything else, it's the word uncertainty. And we have so much uncertainty about how things will unwind in the next 6 months or so, that we felt that it was not fair to potential applicants to have a November deadline as we normally do, and begin to schedule people perhaps in January or possibly in July, you know, if we didn't really know what the situation would hold. So we have put the 2021 fellowship and artist-in-residence application process on hold. It is very much our hope to bring it back during 2021. And maybe the calendar year won't be January to December, but we're just going to have to take sort of a wait and see approach for that. If any of you would like more information on that, feel free to contact the Lloyd Library, and we also will be posting information on all of our various communication networks as we have that information available. I would now just like to take the opportunity, Melissa, to thank you so much. I'd also like to give a shout out to Erin Campbell. She's the Lloyd Library person, but she also is our Fellows and Artist-in-Residence Coordinator. And so much of what happens with these very, very talented scholars is the result of Erin's hard work, as well as providing reference assistance to them. So with that, I'd like to say good night. I would like to point out that we are open for research, scheduled research. So if you want to come in to the Lloyd, contact us and we will schedule an appointment. We're following great social distance and safety practices, and you can find information about that on our website. And we hope to see you back for future programs. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.